Welcome to the pre-show.
Welcome to the pre-show.
Looking forward to chatting with Martha Johnson and Mark Gane from Martha
now,
and the Muffins. Now you can do your.
What can I get now?
So you told me this last week, and by the time this episode goes up, we'll have 100 Welcome to the Music episodes. So congratulations, Gregg.
Thanks, buddy.
Way to go. So I want to ask you this question.
If I'm not mistaken, didn't the one I just published, isn't that the 100th? And this would be the 102nd?
This is 102nd. Like, who's counting? I'm not counting. You're the one that's counting. You have to tell me.
That's fine. That's fine.
But it makes sense because we've been almost 2 years recording from home. Averaged about once a week, although we take a couple of months off during the year. And when we started pre-pandemic at the end of 2019.
Yep.
So 100. And of course, our first official one was a live recording with your friend, Josie Dye.
Was.
But yes, so I just wanted to ask
Radical
you.
Road.
Yeah, at our sponsor. What have they done for us, Gregg, past 2 years, Radical Road?
They have brought beer. They, being Steve, the owner, has brought beer to my cottage. He's continued to be my good buddy. He brought beer to the Mag from Magfest.
So far you've only talked about what he's done for you. So I'm waiting for.
Well, that's why they're a sponsor.
No, Steve and the whole Radical Road fam is great. Looking forward to getting back in there.
Yep.
I wanted to ask you any highlights. I don't think out of 100 you can pick your favorite one unless you actually do have one. But do you have any highlights?
There's so many. There's times when we laughed so hard, like when we were done recording the Sass Jordan episode, and my wife said, I don't think I've actually ever heard you laugh that much during a recording. There was, really detailed, in-depth conversations like the one we just had now with Martha and the Muffins, with Mark and Martha, where it was fantastic just going into the history of the Toronto scene back then in their late 70s, early 80s.
Yeah.
There's people that opened up to us, like Ron Sexsmith, in ways that, there's, talking to some of the people in terms of geeking it out from a technical perspective.
Mark Howard would be one of those.
Mark Howard, even some of the conversations we were with Vin Rock about sort of the marketing side of it.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's so many. It's just been.
There's been. I don't want to. I'm trying to go in alphabetical order, but I remember that conversation we had with Tom Wilson. In an office, actually, we were actually sitting in an office.
Yep.
And he was there. You'll know the name, but he was there with his manager.
Yep.
Is that right?
Yep.
Just a giant of a man.
Yeah.
Just a giant. And I can't remember if I was telling you or if I actually admitted to him, like I was so nervous. And at the time I had so many notes. I used to have a notebook. Well, now it's on a computer screen, but I used to have a notebook with my notes. Not necessarily of questions, but just of sort of topics and themes. And at that time I hadn't written as many notes as I had, preparing for Tom Wilson.
Yeah.
That was a great
and a giant of a man in terms of personality too, not just that.
Of course.
But he's a presence physically, and then he's a presence. Period. He's just Yeah, Sate was another person like Tom that just, filled the room. Just,
she was very forthcoming. Like she didn't hold anything back.
No.
And she just put out some new music as well, so people should go check out Sate, Sate. A great artist. Remember? I don't know if this was an interesting evening. With that Indian rock band, Parvaz.
Parvaz, yes. We had like two mics, and 8 of us in the room.
Yeah, the whole band was there.
Yeah, we didn't have the production quality that we do today.
No,
with that one. No, that was amazing. I mean, I was looking at that the other day, in the banner on the homepage, and thinking back to that interview. Just great kids, great guys from Kashmir. Well, some of them were, who were over for, I think, Canadian Music Week, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. That was great.
Or North by Northeast, I'm not sure which, but anyway.
Oh, you're right. One of our last episodes was actually a live performance. AJ Massey. You and Jefferson. Yeah. That was fun talking with Ajay. And Justin. His lead guitarist. Yeah. That was a fun night.
That was a show. That was Radical Road is not a big room.
No.
And it was packed.
Yeah.
And the crowd, oh my God, that was such a great night. That was a great night.
That was fun. I realized, and I think I realized this before, and so we haven't had many on, but over a period of time, we were talking to a lot of country music artists.
Yep.
And they were fun. And then I realized Gregg despises country music.
Yeah. It's not, Anyway.
Wow. Adrian Sutherland.
Thanks for calling me out.
Yeah, no problem. You do it enough to me during the show. So.
Fair enough.
It has been an utter joy speaking with Adrian. He's been on the show twice. Yep. The first time he came on, I was driving solo. And then we spoke with him not too long ago.
Just a couple shows ago. I think he was number 9. If I'm not mistaken, he was number 99.
99.
Number 98.
Reserved for the greats. He's just a absolute. He's refreshing because he's honest. He's creative, and he doesn't sugarcoat stuff.
Yeah, and I would put him in that group of people that I talked about, that where it was just refreshing because of how open and honest the guests are, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, Chin and Jetty was fun. He came on twice. It was interesting. The first time he came on, I think he had forgotten that he had this. But he played us a tune, I think.
He played us, I think, some Rush, did he not?
He did.
The Rush tune he played?
Yeah. And then he came on again. Danny Miles from July Talk.
Danny Miles. That was a fun talk.
That was fun.
That was the start of Danny and my wife's, I don't know what you would call it on Instagram.
A bird romance?
The bird romance. That's a good way to put it. Yeah, bird romance, for sure.
We started a segment that we haven't revisited in quite some time called Lost Venues. Well, in fact, let me correct that. We tend to do Lost Venue segments.
Yeah.
However, there have been times when we would just do a Lost segment or Lost Venues episode. So we started doing that. Amin Bhatia, and was interesting. So he was referred by my uncle. So apparently Amin and I are related somehow. I don't know how. And so I was unsure how that episode was going to go, because he makes music for TV shows.
Yep.
And not songs, right? So it's more of the
Soundtrack.
The soundtrack, yeah. But I could have left because you two just geeked out over equipment.
Yeah.
That was, I really enjoyed that one.
Yeah, that was we totally geeked out over keyboards and drum machines and
yeah. Tea Party, Jeff Burrows.
Jeff Burrows was great.
He was awesome.
Another guy who opened up and talked about a lot of stuff. Then, yep.
Candle was great.
Yep.
We had a lot of fun. Speaking.
Are you going alphabetically through everybody?
Not alphabetically.
We're gonna be here. This is be a whole other show, and I'm not saying we shouldn't give everybody the love.
Okay, so quickly, Stevie Salas. I am so happy.
Yeah.
We got to speak with Stevie. Shad, unfortunately, you couldn't join us. Shad was like a bucket list for me. And similar to people will listen to Martha and the Muffins today, the Spoons was an absolute joy. And if the Spoons were getting paid as if I was a radio station, they would have literally made millions of dollars since we spoke to them in mid-January till now.
You played 7 million songs on Spotify of theirs, and they got a check for $12.59.
Something like that. $12.59.
Yeah. No, not $1,259. $12.59.
Yeah. So I'm looking forward. Gregg, I know there's 100.
To the next 100?
I'm looking forward to the next 100.
Yeah.
Doing some live shows. Yeah.
Knock on wood.
Knock on wood. And getting those mics out that we invested in, and mic stands that we invested in, and see if we can remember how to work all that stuff.
Yeah. No, it's been a good 2 years. So many amazing guests, so much insight.
Yeah.
A lot of geeking out. We're very fortunate to have, people like Ola and Eric Alper.
Yes.
Support us with introducing us to their bands and their musicians.
Yeah. Because you and I, we don't know anybody in music.
That's true. I know where you're going with this, but yeah, that's I'll say 99% true. And that 1% is probably a little bit bigger than 1%. But yeah, no, like Mike Turner, right? That's where you're going. And others. Yeah.
And others.
Joel Carrier that we'd love to have on the show. And no, totally.
I'm trying to find somebody who knows both of those people.
Yeah, I know. If only you knew somebody who know those two and others.
Gregg, this is the start. There's another 100+ episodes. There's a paperback book that is going to be coming out. So welcome to the music, the book. Sometime in the near future, who knows?
You're throwing it back to the genesis of this, are you?
Yes. But that's for another episode.
That is for another episode.
Yeah.
And that's very politically based and everything else. But, that's fun.
Awesome. And that's the pre-show.
That is the pre-show.
Hi, the following podcast is brought to you by Radical Road Brewery, the best craft beer in the heart of Leslieville. Find them at 1177 Queen Street East. That's Radical Road Brewery.
Hi, I'm Martha Johnson.
And I'm Mark Gane, and we're from Martha and the Muffins, and you're listening and watching Welcome to the Music.
Welcome to the music.
Welcome. It's such a pleasure to have you join us. I know myself, 80s, early 90s musician, very involved in the Canadian Toronto music scene. And I just thank you for your body of work and your music over the years. So.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
And congratulations. I know it's been a few months now, but congrats on Marthology, In and Outtakes.
Thank you.
Tell me what was the thinking behind releasing that particular album?
Well, our manager, Graham Stairs, had been talking for years about us doing what he called an odds and sods album, which was like collect stuff that you haven't released and put it on a compilation. And, we kept saying, yeah, it's not a bad idea. And finally, I guess maybe all this, the shutdown and everything from COVID gave us some more time to think about it, perhaps. And so we started going into all of our archives. And, over the years, we would listen to certain things and then forget about them and then listen to them again, go, hey, that's not bad.
Kinda
Maybe
cool.
we should do something with that. And so we just started listening to stuff and we compiled the things that we thought would be interesting to people. And
It was a way of getting back into the swing of things too. We're writing a new Martha and the Muffins album with new songs, and it's sort of a stopgap in between that till that's ready.
Yeah, I think part of the thinking, certainly on Graham's part, was that it would kind of reintroduce us because we go through periods where we're not very visible for some time, and he's thought that if we put this out now, that would kind of reintroduce us and set up the new album, which is probably coming later this year if we start working on it a lot harder than we are right now.
That's great. That's great. It's interesting too because during COVID, a lot of people are exploring and finding new older music, if you will, that just because of the mixes that they're listening to on Apple Music and Spotify and that. So it's like they're discovering these bands and music that maybe they hadn't listened to previously. Probably a lot of the younger people too, right?
Yeah, and that's interesting how we're getting. I mean, our main demographic is obviously probably people from our age, but most of them 10 years younger. But we do have a sizable number of 20-somethings, which is really gratifying too. And we often get comments, and it's come in. Some of them have come in with the Marthology album, that this stuff doesn't really sound old at all. Obviously some of it does, but I think we've always kind of followed our own path, and that kind of when you do that, that kind of sets you outside of things in a good way. I think.
Well, I think we had our own sound. We stayed sort of true to our own sound rather than the sound of the day, the trend of the day.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we had Sandy and Gord on 2 weeks ago, I think, from the Spoons, and I actually made a note of that and I don't know if it was a Canadiana thing and some of the sounds that were coming out of Canada or just in general, but like bands like yourselves and the Spoons were going in their own unique direction that really almost made the sound and the songs timeless. Like maybe that's why the 20-somethings today are listening to it and going, this is really great music. I don't know.
It might be, and it may be possibly to some extent geographical too, because we certainly, when we were starting, the big influences for us were London and New York, and we were kind of, in the middle of those two cultural circles, and listening and looking at a lot of what was coming from both those centers too.
You guys know you're in this book, do you? Or
Yes,
yeah, we do. And,
the whole chapter.
yeah, and
yes, and so when
He interviewed us.
yeah, he did a quite extensive interview, maybe even more than one interview. But we had a long talk with Johnny, and he did a great job.
It's a good book.
It's a great book.
Oh, it's fantastic.
Yeah.
And so when Gregg is asking that question about, sound, Canadiana sound, I almost want to say, maybe there's almost like a neighborhood sound, or maybe the uniqueness is what defines it. So it's not necessarily, although, like you said, Mark, about your influence with New York and London, but at the same time, it's a unique sound. So maybe it's not a Canadian or a Toronto sound, but because there were so many, like Johnny puts it in the book, so many of these DIY bands that were figuring shit out on their own, and really driving towards independence, as well as just music that they enjoyed rather than wanting to follow a trend. That's why bands like Martha and the Muffins have a sound that you can't quite place in a geography.
Yeah, certainly. We were obviously part of that early post-punk new wave scene, in the mid 70s, early 80s in Toronto. But what's interesting about any early scene, and I've said this before about the blues, country music, early rock and roll, early funk and R&B, and everything. Is in the early days of all those things, nobody really knows what they're doing, which is actually a really exciting time, because everybody's just doing it. And then later on, it becomes kind of, codified. Like now there's rock school, and now you go and learn to hold a guitar a certain way, or, like the Jack Black parody. Yeah. But it's kind of true. But when you think of some of the early Motown people were they grew up in very impoverished circumstances. And I think there's a story about the legendary Motown bass player James Jamerson, playing with a wire on the side of a barn somewhere. And I don't know if I have the facts totally accurate, but they weren't going, hey, how am I going to sound like this? They were just doing it and exploring it. And then, that in itself turned into Motown. And then everybody now associates, a certain kind of sound with Motown. But when they were doing it, they weren't thinking about that, and neither were we, and nor a lot of artists.
Yeah, you're just doing it.
Yeah. Just having fun, really.
Yeah. So, from what I've read, and I hope I get my places in the GTA correct, you guys grew up in Thornhill, or the band sort of formed up in Thornhill. Is that right?
I went to high school in Thornhill, and all the friends that I had were very interested in music and bands, and we would have weekend bands. We just record a few songs on a weekend. The guy who's Carl, who's the bass player in Martha and the Muffins, he had a tape recorder because his father had a business that sold tape recorders. So we would make these songs and do it just for the weekend. So we were quite obsessed with music. And another friend of mine knew everything that came out of England. Got all the all the magazines, sounds, and all those NME. So it was just a real interest we had in music, and then we all moved downtown, and band started from that. But the band was also very tied to Ontario College of Art.
Yeah, and also there was the Thornhill contingent.
It had something to it, didn't it? Oh,
it did, for sure. But half the band, the first lineup of Martha and Muffins was from Etobicoke. And but basically we were suburban. We fled the suburbs for downtown, like a lot of people did. And but it did, and the scene did center around the Ontario College of Art and the Beverly Tavern, which was sort of the watering hole for all the art students and their teachers, and places like Crash and Burn, which I think lasted one summer, and then sort of spread west to the Horseshoe and later on to the Edge. But, in the early days, it was really the kids coming downtown from the suburbs and the art students that were kind of pollinating Queen Street West, which of course wasn't Queen Street West at all. It was this completely deserted, grimy, not happening area at all. On the weekends, it was dead.
Hardware stores.
Yeah, well, it had, local businesses, but a lot of them were not thriving, and like many city centers, it's like the artists and young people that sort of go to where the rents are cheap and then and make a scene, and then everybody else wants to be there. Yeah. Which is a normal kind of sociological type of series of events for development of city areas. Like that's how it happens all over the place.
Yeah, as gentrification sort of. Well, first of all, the young people come in and the artists, and they make it cool, and people come in, and then you see the gentrification. I mean, we're seeing it. You see it in Parkdale. Parkdale used to be the place you'd never wanted to go to, and then
that's right.
The artists and the foodies went in, and then all of a sudden now, people are buying these homes and renovating them and making these massive multi-million-dollar places. I mean, yeah.
Yeah,
I lived there in the 80s.
Yeah, Martha lived there in the 80s, and it was not a fun place. But
yeah,
and you're right. And a half generation before us, it was Yorkville.
Yep.
Well, Yorkville wasn't a great place, in the early days either. And then all the, when Joni Mitchell and Neil Young and Bruce Cockburn and everybody started playing at the small clubs there, all of a sudden it became groovy too,
Yeah.
And now look at it.
Yeah, exactly.
Not a folk singer in sight.
Very, very gentrified.
Yeah.
So let's quickly pause here and figure out where we're going to invest in real estate. Right now, where are all the cool kids hanging out? And let's go buy some land.
Well, that's a really, good idea, Karim, because, it's a huge problem now. We've done some other interviews, and if they're younger or, some of the interviewers have been in bands, I say, where are you guys practicing? Like, where are your rehearsal spaces? Because one of the things that triggers that kind of activity, and one of the major things, is cheap space,
cheap rent.
Yeah, the availability of cheap rent and space. Yeah. So in our early days, all those areas like around Peter Street, south of Queen, all those old, what used to be industrial buildings, were lofts, and lofts in the old sense of the word, not like condo lofts, but like real lofts with like drafty windows and no heat. And everybody was renting spaces like that. And
cockroaches.
Had cockroaches, as I will remember. But, where are those places now? Like, like maybe you have to go way out past Scarborough or into the, near countryside to even get space like that.
A lot of musicians are moving to Barrie and Hamilton and places like that.
Yeah.
But even Hamilton, I mean, we talked with, we had Tom Wilson on a couple of years back, and he said Hamilton, my stepson moved out of Hamilton. I mean, they moved into Mississauga because it was close for work, but even Hamilton's out of reach. It's almost like I see young musicians going out to like Prince Edward County, and you talked about Barrie and up in that, like the Golden Horseshoe is no longer attainable for young artists.
Our daughter moved to Prince Edward County recently.
Yeah,
and it's the real estate there is going up and up too.
Yeah, I was going to say that. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, and that has huge sociological implications for culture. Mm-hmm. Like if you can't have creative people affording to live in a city, and all, then it becomes all super wealthy people or people with means. What happens to the culture of a city then? And I know there's huge problems in other cities like San Francisco that used to be a huge cultural hub after World War II. There were all sorts of writers, and then in the 60s, all sorts of bands and everything. Nobody can afford to live there either. So what happens to a city like that, or Toronto? It's a big question.
So, I mean, Mark and Martha, the both of you, Martha and the Muffins was formed in Queen West before it was the Queen West that, before it was Queen West, really,
Yeah.
It wasn't like, let's go to Queen West and see some cool bands. It was like, don't go to Queen West because all there is, crappy places and the students live there. There's no nice things ever. But you just, move forward a decade and it's like it's happening. All the new music is happening there. And then fast forward 30, 40 years, and there's maybe a handful of places, right? I mean, El Macombo is just south, or no, it's on College, isn't it?
No, it's on Spadina.
South
in College, it's just below College Street.
Right. So there's only a few places in that sort of neighborhood that are left. Queen West is not, the Queen West that Johnny might talk about.
It's gone.
And it's gone, right? So So before I don't know if I want to ask you about, where's the next neighborhood, because I want to talk about, the neighborhoods that you remember, and I'm really fascinated with Queen West. Outside of it being a place that you could afford, you grew up in a time that there were a lot of these young, whether it was new wave or punk bands, but it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, Martha and Mark, seems to me that there was music everywhere in the neighborhood at that time.
Well, there was because you could afford to live in that area. Clubs could afford the rent, and maybe in some cases the owners actually owned those buildings. They might have owned them, when it was cheap to buy them, or when the neighborhood fell into harder times, they hung on, and then they were there when it started coming back. There was a huge visual art community there. Like, there were all sorts of, who are now famous Canadian artists like Graham Coftry that lived on Spadina Avenue. And I had a loft right at College in Spadina. And there were artists, living in those apartments above the stores, down Spadina and along Queen West. And, you could, I think we lived on a boat. This is going to sound crazy, but I had shared this loft with two other people, and I think we probably only spent about $2,000 a year.
Wow.
I lived in a house with 5 people in the house, and we each paid $35, I think, a month.
I mean, does this sound like 1870 and not 1970?
That is crazy. Tell me about, take me back to the 70s and 80s in that neighborhood. Who are some of the bands that you guys are growing up with and sharing the stage with?
Well, the ones that were close to us, I think, were the Dishes and the G-Rays.
Johnny and the G-Rays, the Dishes, the Cads, the Diodes. Some of the Diodes went to OCA. And there was
B-Girls.
The B-Girls.
Curse, the Ugly.
The Vile Tones.
They're all in that book.
Yeah, they're all in that book. There was part of the Ontario College of Art at the time was the Experimental Arts Department. And it had its own building just south of where the Sharp Center, the big thing on stilts on McCall Street is now. And it used to be the Brinks Safe building, like the Brinks Safe People building. And it was rented out to OCA. And that's where all the super cutting edge kind of performance art, audio-visual art was being done. And the Diodes and Martha and the Muffins would sometimes play at parties there or rehearse there. And some of us were doing experimental music there. The building was only demolished, I think, about 3 or 4 years ago. It was still there, and it's gone now, and I think it's a condo. Surprise,
of course it is. Of course it's a condo.
Yeah, I mean, what else would it be, right? But that was a center too. Like it's interesting because this artist Julie McMillan did a bell box mural of Martha and the Muffins on McCall Street, just above Queen, a couple of years ago, and we went down and met her. And while she was working on it, we were talking with her, and basically where we were standing, literally like 50 yards, to the west was the Beverly Tavern, which is gone. Still there at the time was the Brinks building, which was just up the street, and a bit further OCA. To the east on, what's the adjoining street next to McCall, where the Rex is. Anyway, right across from the Rex was our old...
Duncan.
No, not Duncan. But the one block over east was our old rehearsal space, which used to be the Rex's stables, like way back when.
St. Patrick.
Wow.
St. Patrick, right, on St. Patrick. So literally, like where she has her mural, you could draw a radius around that, and all this stuff was happening. And I mean, it's not only us, but all these other bands. And, nobody had money. There wasn't, and you didn't need a lot of money. Like you could live in this city and, you were a student and you didn't have a lot of money and you lived in some pretty crappy places, but there was just all this excitement. Everybody saw these bands in New York and London and elsewhere. And people who didn't think that they would ever be in a band, there seemed to be a whole atmosphere where, kind of looking at each other, hey, we could be in a band. I mean, we don't really know anything about being in a band, but we could do that.
I bought an electric organ, and immediately I was asked to be in bands.
Yeah, just because she had it.
I didn't play it. I didn't know how to play it, really.
That's funny.
Few chords.
And there was, a person who was so important in the scene who unfortunately passed away a few years ago, named Stephen Davey, who was a Thornhill classmate. Well, he was he went to the same high school.
Yeah, he went to the same high school.
Right. And he came down. He was the one who formed the Dishes. We'd see the Dishes play at the Beverly with the 30 other people in the room. And I remember looking at them going, wow, this is cool. Like this would be cool to do. And then, one of my fellow art students in the Brinks building who'd been in bands with you, David Miller, he said, do you want to start a band? And I went, yeah, okay. And then he brought Martha in, and Martha, knew some other people, and I brought my brother in. And we just started working on our own songs, and we got gigs at the Beverly, and you had to carry your equipment up the stairs and in the alleyway where the chicken slaughterhouse was. And,
But bands still start that way now, don't they?
I
It's
mean,
like
I
chicken
hope
houses.
so. Yeah, they have to go near the places. Like, I hope they do, but I don't know where they do it.
I thought it was their basement of their parents' house.
Like maybe their mom and dad's basement, which is okay. You got to do it somewhere.
Yeah.
But and it was like the Peter Pan restaurant was one of the few places that was there. They've been around there a long time. The Bamboo Club, which is now long gone, was actually a bamboo store.
I did not know that.
Yeah, the Horseshoe was there, but it was a country and western bar more at that time. And
then there was a sort of a second wave, like Parachute Club and Altamoda and.
They were a bit later as it expanded westward. But I remember very clearly when suburban women who at my age at that time appeared to be middle-aged, they were probably only 10 years older than we were, but starting to come down there and open new boutiques that sold like ripped sweatshirts with safety pins in them, and we opened for the B-52s at the Danforth Music Hall.
Wow.
And I remember that was the first gig that we noticed suburban kids were in the audience. Before that, it all been like people, fellow bands, and it was a really small scene. And I went, wow, this is starting to, and obviously I think they'd been signed at that time.
Yeah.
So it was starting to happen, right? There were bands getting signed, and obviously kids in the burbs were hearing this stuff and starting to come downtown.
Fascinating. Yeah, that's fascinating. B-52's at the Danforth and you guys, that'd be crazy. Anyway, sorry, just geeking out over that one. So looking at that and fast forward a few years, and I think Echo Beach won a Casby, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct? Am I right with that one?
Casby's were
no, the Casby's didn't exist at that point.
Was it Juno? Was it Juno then?
The Juno.
It was
no.
We won a Juno award for what was it, Single of the Year in 1980, and we tied. They didn't just give it to us; they tied. It was tied with Anne Murray.
Really?
Yeah. Like when we were there at the Juno Awards, it's like this big deal, and Pierre Trudeau, who was the prime minister, sitting a few seats back and and kind of flirting at you, wasn't he? Like that bad boy. But anyway, but they, they were up there and they opened up the envelope. They go, and the single of the year is Anne Murray. Can I have this dance or whatever? And we went, oh, okay, and they went, hold on. There's another name here. It's a tie. It's like Martha and the Muffins and Echo Beach. So I think that's one of the few times where there was a tie, and I'm not sure. I mean,
I don't think there ever had been.
Total respect to Anne Murray, but like she'd won about 1,000 Junos before. Like, couldn't we have just won it by ourselves that year? But I don't know.
Yeah, well, fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough. But where I wanted to go with the Casbys was, I was hoping to talk a bit about sort of the importance of CFNY, the spirit of radio, and sort of at that time that's where I thought I was going with the Casby thing. I apologize for thinking that.
That's a good place to go.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about sort of that, the importance of what that radio station did for not just yourselves, but just, I got goosebumps, the music in general at that time.
I've still got the radio that has CFNY on it.
Oh, do you?
Yeah.
Yeah, you've got, they get those out at some point. But their CFNY's importance cannot be underestimated. And, we could talk about the Garys as well with the Edge and all the other venues they ran. But CFNY, the spirit of radio could not have been a better slogan for them, because they were like, at that point, radio was all pre-programmed, and there was probably a handful of people in North America that told everybody what they should be playing. And, their CFNY was out in Brampton. It was in some little house. We used to go interviews, and they did it for the music, and that was quite obvious. And so did the Garys, and so did a handful of other people. There are people that they're not there going, hey, how much money can we make, or how can we corner this market, or they just did it. And I remember when we did our self-produced single, and I can't remember when it was, what night it was played, but we heard it was going to be played. And, we heard it on the radio, and we just went, wow, this is, and this is probably like a year before we signed with Virgin. Like, it was so thrilling. Here's something you did by yourself coming over the radio. And, that story, I mean, everyone you talk to from that era in Toronto will probably say the same thing,
Yeah.
And they, they're responsible in a large way for making the scene what it was, unbelievable, fantastic.
Yeah. And I think too, like you mentioned the Garys as well, like between the spirit of radio and the Garys, and you talk about the influences of London and New York. I mean, both of those entities brought so much music to Toronto for younger aspiring musicians to hear and experience, and and the Edge, obviously.
Yes. Like even before the Edge, they were bringing in like a really eclectic range. I mean, I don't know how many cool bands we saw that the Garys brought in, like Sun Ra, and we didn't see the Police. Everybody in the world claims they did,
So
but
they saw
when they played the Horseshoe, we were not there. But that's a legendary gig, and
and the Talking Heads
Talking
at
Heads.
OCA.
Yeah, I don't know whether
I was there, definitely.
You were there
at OCA. I didn't realize.
Yeah, they played at OCA when they were still a trio.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was very geeky.
Yeah.
But in a great way.
In a great way.
Of
It was great.
Yeah.
Wow. So
Geek
tell me about Dan. Before everyone knew him as Daniel Lanois, apparently he just went by Dan.
Well, everybody called him Danny back then.
Danny.
Yeah.
So tell me about the Lanois brothers and working with Daniel Lanois.
Well, we met him through his sister, our bass player, Jocelyn Lanois.
Yep.
She said, I have these brothers who have a studio called Grant Avenue in Hamilton, and we could do our demo there. So we went to Hamilton and met the two brothers, Bob and Dan. And we really liked working with Dan. It was a real rapport with him. And we went on to make a few records with him too.
Yeah, that was for our third album. And we were really not happy with our relationship with Virgin because they were trying to push us in a certain direction. And so we'd made the first two albums in England, which was a great experience. It was phenomenal in a lot of ways. But the third album, we had a lot of different ideas about what we wanted to do. And the accidental meeting of Jocelyn and her, we thought, okay, this studio is probably some little room, but let's go check it out. And the great thing, both of them were great. Like Bob was like super technical and kind of knew everything about how to run a studio. And Dan, they were both creative, but Dan, was kind of like the engineer, producer, creator guy. And we had an instant rapport from him, and he was unlike any other producer or engineer we'd worked with because he was completely open to everything. And he wasn't from an art college background. Like he was more of like a roots guy, Hamilton, Dundas guy, Rudy. But at the same time we met him, he was just almost simultaneously starting to work with Eno. And we've told this story before, but like very early on, the Lanois brother, it was either Bob or Dan, came into the studio and they were there and they went, yeah, there's this guy named Brian Eno wants to come record here, and we're a bit worried about the check bouncing because they weren't in that kind of realm, right? Whereas we were a huge Roxy Music fan.
Yeah, of course.
And then when Eno started doing his weird solo albums, we were all over that, right? And my jaw just dropped. I went, what? Like, Eno is coming to Hamilton? And that was the beginning of their relationship. So I think, obviously, Eno had a lot to do with Dan's introduction to art music, but I feel we had this, we were from that background too. So unlike a lot of engineers that we'd worked with before, Dan was totally open. Like if I wanted to make a weird noise, if I wanted to, we're very textural oriented. So if I wanted to make a sound that kind of was black and despairing, and I wanted to kick a bunch of cardboard boxes down the Grand Avenue stairs and slow them down 2 octaves, it wouldn't be like previous experiences where they'd roll their eyes and go, oh God, Mark's going to go off the rails again.
Treated piano.
Yeah. Dan would just start setting it all up and go, great. And sometimes we would spend a lot of time on a sound that didn't work out, and it didn't matter. Like he was there to just, make the atmosphere as conducive to creativity as possible. And in some respects, that was a new thing for us, because before that, it was always, like we're spending, an hour doing this. Mark, do we really need to do this? Or
it was an exciting time creatively for musicians, I think, when you had the opportunity to go into a studio like that and work so creatively and just try ideas out and see if they worked.
Nice.
That's great.
I'm just looking at the time, and I can't believe it's almost 7:15. I feel like we just got started talking. So I don't know. I don't want to quickly go through this, but if you have a hard stop at 7:30, please let me know. But I wanted to ask you about your relationship to the industry. And both of you can pipe into this, but I think, Mark, I read somewhere that you have choice words for Richard Branson, or maybe you did in the past, about your whole experience with Virgin. Tell me about your relationship to, I don't know, I guess, big labels, and if we want to, for the sake of time, now big technology companies and their relationship with how music is distributed.
Well, it's a shit show. And it always has.
Mark, listen, don't hold back, please.
we would have to do about 10 parts to get me off this. But I would say that, we started off in a very small scene in Toronto, which we've described. Through a bunch of very lucky circumstances, we were signed with a UK label, which, Virgin Records was, a cool label as we perceived it. And then it turned out that they weren't so cool. And we were very naive. As I think I mentioned before, there was no rock school. There was no internet that you could go and say and look at, here's a typical record contract and here's what you avoid at all costs.
We had no manager.
Yeah, we had no manager. We were completely like babes in the woods. So I don't know where to start. Basically, the whole conventional record deal was that you would get an advance, which wasn't a great big advance. And certainly for a 6-member band, it wasn't enough to live on, but you thought it was great. And there were the promises of getting a record out, which was super exciting. Yeah. And it was. Yeah. And they did a fantastic job of promoting it. Like when we spent half of 1980 in London, it was a real eye-opener because London was the epicenter of pop music for decades. Just think about the bands that have come out of London since the late 50s, right? And you're seeing this mechanism in motion, and it's for you. So you're going to the BBC, you're doing Top of the Pops, you're going into restaurants where they've basically put all of the London music press there to meet you. It was crazy.
And flying to Paris
and doing television shows and, all this. But the downside of it is that you're getting, if you ever recoup the money that you spent on the album and going to the Manor Studios and having lovely dinners every night and stuff like that, the chances are you'll never pay that off. And most bands don't. If you do, the other thing is that you're paying it off with your 10%. They're getting 90% of it and using your 10% to pay off these huge debts, which nobody ever does. So that's the old formula. But the thing that really pissed us off is that we realized there was a clause called cross-collateralization, which meant they could take your publishing income, which was regarded as a separate thing and not part of a record deal. Those were two separate income streams. Well, I don't know whether Branson invented this or his business people or who, but it was decided that they could cross-collateralize your royalties so that all your publishing income would go to pay off your debt too.
Wow.
And I've thought about putting our original contract online, just so people can see where that was buried. It's buried deep, like pages.
Nobody knew about it, though.
And nobody knew about it, and nobody really understood it.
Yeah, I don't think we understood.
No, we didn't really understand.
We didn't understand the ramifications it would have. Yeah, we wouldn't have any money in our bank account.
And
you guys are just kids. You guys are just musicians. Music, right?
Yeah, and it's that old story about creative people want to create, and that doesn't, and nowadays people, I think, are much wiser. Yeah. There's way more information out there. But it wasn't like that back then. So by the time we had realized this, we were opening for Eurythmics in New York State somewhere, the tennis place.
In Forest Hill.
Forest Hill, yeah. And at that time we had a manager, and there's a knock at the door to our trailer, and our manager walks in and goes, "There's someone here to see you. It's Richard." So Branson's there, and he leans forward and he goes, Martha, and he holds out his hand, and I just stood there with my arms folded. And, I wouldn't shake his hand because he fucking stole our money, right? So what am I supposed to do? Be happy to see him? And, Virgin started off with an illegal tax scam that they got away with until Inland Revenue caught them. And by that time, they'd made enough money from Mike Oldfield's Tubular Bells that they just paid off the penalty. And that's the kind of people you're dealing with, right? It's like whatever we can do to get money. And now he's a billionaire and sending rockets up into space. I'm not saying he isn't a clever guy, although I thought the people around him were more clever than he was. But
well, that's being clever.
But he was a real alpha dog. Every time you met him, he was the center of attention.
He played practical jokes on people.
Yeah, and it wasn't like fun, like it was supposed to be funny, but really the subliminal thing was, I'm the boss. We're all having a fun time here, but the real message was
power trip.
Me. And I mean, I don't know that you can become a billionaire without being like that,
But I hear you.
And now we have, like the money has now gone from the labels to the tech giants.
Well, also, it still goes to the labels.
Yeah, no, it's still the labels.
Labels make deals with the Spotify's and other people to give access to their catalog, which a lot of the people like us have catalog tied up with Universal or Sony or Warner's or somebody, because they signed a deal a long time ago that gave the rights away for forever, in perpetuity.
I'm going to run away for 1 second because I want to show you a book that I just read that talks about this whole thing.
Sure.
So I think
so Martha, that'd be great.
We'll talk with Martha.
So Martha, quick question for you then around that. I noticed on your links in terms of where you're sending people to go and listen and purchase the music, I think it's Apple and Amazon alone. Is that on purpose based on who's paying out what? Or because I know the new album's on Spotify, but you don't necessarily link to that. Just wondering. And I'm not trying to, again, everybody's all up in arms with Spotify right now, so I'm not trying to fan any flames, but I just interested to know.
It's the reason why those are the links is because of the distribution deal with record companies. Like we don't have control over that now because of the deal we now have as a distribution deal. Before, there's still most of our stuff is still through CD Baby, and they aggregate it out to Spotify and Amazon and all that.
For a long time.
We've talked for years about getting our website back in order and having our own online store, which I'll wake up at 4 a.m. with like a tense feeling in my body, going, "We really got to get before we die. We really got to get."
We're too busy making music.
There's all sorts of excuses, but the choices are limited for sure. I mean, and we should have a real Bandcamp page and stuff. CD Baby used to have an online store and they closed it down a few years ago, which was a drag. Maybe it wasn't making enough money. But I want to show you. I don't know if you can see
Yeah.
It's
The
called
Death of Artists.
The Death of the Artist by William Deresiewicz. And basically, it's how the whole middle level of creators right across the cultural spectrum. Like, so we're talking about writers, so literature, music, theater, dance, visual art, how the big tech companies have basically hollowed out the whole middle class of artists. Are usually the ones that are the most creative and make their living from whatever they do, and are the most innovative. And it's a really eye-opening book. I mean, we know firsthand about a lot of this because we've been in the music biz for 40 years, but it's a very alarming book because a lot of people, one of the major subjects of the book is nobody can afford to make a living doing what they used to make a living doing. So what happens? That's the big question. But I just thought I would bring that up because we are talking sort of about this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like even, and I was thinking about that in terms of when we were talking about Toronto and Martha mentioning about your daughter going to Prince Edward County and it's like, and that's expensive. Like I know Chuck D from the Salads is a real estate agent out there now. And it's like where, like what happens? And again, it's not a question to answer right now, but to the point of the book, like what happens? What I don't even know. I feel despair asking that question because I don't know. Sorry.
It's exactly like that, Greg. I mean, and the writer does make some suggestions, and then there's people like Ari Herstand, who wrote a book called The New Music Business that was unsparing in his analysis that the old model is dead.
Yeah, they're still referring to the old contracts and deals that people like us made in the 70s and 80s and before, and they just doesn't make any sense. I mean, what is copyright if everybody's copying everything and taking it from YouTube or on their phones, you copy whatever you want. You copy a film, copy a movie, copy TV shows and music and everything. I mean, there is no really copyright anymore, I don't think.
Yeah. Well, I think one of Dershowitz's points is that a generation back, music became, with Napster, a generation grew up assuming music has no value, no monetary value. Like people aren't willing to pay for it.
It should be free.
Yeah.
It should, that's the attitude for some, but it's just there. Like it's there to stream. It's there. You don't go to a music store anymore and spend, $5 on an album.
Yeah. You hear a song on the radio and you go, I want to have that.
But I
don't get the single.
Yeah. So I would say read this book, and also Ari Herstand has like an online blog, and The New Music Business is a really interesting book to read too, because he basically says how it is. He said, forget about trying to be, a pop star. That's dead.
Yeah.
Don't even think about that. You can make, and his whole thing is that you can make a living, and here's how you can do it. And, it works for some people better than it works for others, but he's got a lot of good advice there. So it's not hopeless, Greg.
Yeah.
Not hopeless, but we got to find our way out of it. Yeah.
Yeah. And we have to help the kids. I mean, we have to find ways to facilitate these young kids to be creative. And you said it might be in their basement, their parents' basement. I don't know, but we need the next version of punk. We need the next version of grunge. We need, we're calling for it. There's something's got to happen soon.
Yeah. Our manager has a label called Pop Guru. Okay. And he has a lot of really interesting bands that are young people who are forming these bands and writing songs, and some he manages us as well, and you get the collaboration between these working with other people on the label is quite interesting. I think that's one way of trying to keep things going.
work with younger songwriters and stuff. And, a lot of what we say isn't really relevant anymore, but like we still can impart some kind of wisdom and some of the time anyway, and say like, whatever you do, don't ever sign your publishing away. And, and people know that now. I mean, it's more general knowledge than it was when we were, in our early days, but
Wow. Well, Martha, Mark, I've got so many more questions that I want to ask you.
What we can do is once we get out of the pandemic. So one of our sponsors is Radical Road, which is a microbrew house at Queen and Jones at the bottom there. So if you're open to it, we would love to get to, because I've got a ton of questions still. I know Karim does as well. Would love to jump on and or get together once we get out of this COVID and meet face to face and carry on the conversation.
Wouldn't that be something? Well, that would be great. We'd love to talk to you guys further. And, obviously we've got other things in the pipeline. So, exactly. At some point we'll want to talk about those. And, the conversation has been really great. Like, we really appreciate you having us,
It's been our pleasure.
Yes,
definitely. So before we let you go, if people want to check out your music, past and present, where do they need to go? Where should they check this out?
Well, probably the best one at this time is YouTube, because we have our own page and we have, 40 plus videos that cover the very earliest days. There's like footage from the Electric Ballroom in London from 1980 all the way up to our like weird little videos. Like we do make little videos at home that have very, like compared to Beyonce, the production values are more like DIY. But I like that. Like I like the homemade quality. So there's everything in between, like the videos we did in the 80s and stuff. And
we have a song called "Stay Home and Dance."
Yeah,
we did a video for.
And Instagram, Facebook, we're very conflicted about, and Martha's page for some reason stopped working. I haven't been able to get into it for about a year now, and I don't know. They like quote unquote improved it, and it's really hard to make changes. But we have a Facebook page, Instagram, YouTube. There's probably our website is circling around in the Sargasso Sea. Waiting for us to do something with it. So that YouTube would be probably the way to go. Pop Guru's site maybe, popguru.ca. We're around.
Perfect. We'll link out when we post it onto our site. So
okay, great.
Absolutely, yeah. So go check out. Oh, there's your YouTube. Just Martha and the Muffins on YouTube. Go check them out there. There's a ton of videos. Wow, from like 12 years ago even.
Oh yeah. There's like and like a lot of those videos are 30 years old now. And then Martha is like, there it is, the new one,
the new album.
So where can they buy that CD?
Well, I think that's like a Amazon, Spotify. There's a third one. What's the other big one? Amazon. Oh, Apple.
SoundCloud.
Apple.
Apple, of course.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, those guys. Yeah. So those would be the main avenues.
Well, we'll put links in our show notes for sure. Martha Johnson and Mark Gane from Martha and the Muffins. This has been a treat. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
And we look forward to having you join us again, and we look forward to new music this year.
Well, thanks, Karim and Gregg. You've been great, and we look forward to talking to you again.
Yeah, thanks very much.